Welcome to the summit, Connecting Communities Through Mutual Cultural Understanding. I am Betty McGinnis of World Artist Experiences. Tonight's session will explore effective communications in a multicultural landscape. The summit's past sessions have explored Maryland, who Marylanders are, their origins, their contributions, and their history, and also discussed connecting communities by developing mutual cultural understanding, beginning with self. With great pleasure, I introduce to you tonight's moderator, Ms. B. Fuller, who brings wide experiences in developing communication skills. She has served as a principal, a teacher, a coach, developed projects for global understanding, and serves widely as an educational consultant. And I might say that B has been a committed member of the international education team of World Artist Experiences. In every setting, Ms. Fuller focuses on developing community by inspiring communications and leadership with professionals, with students, and parents. Thank you, Ms. Fuller, for joining us.
Thank you, Betty, for that lovely introduction. I'm really honored to be here this evening as the moderator of the third summit. Tonight, we will look forward to deepening our awareness of the critical role of communication in our daily lives by taking an analytical approach to how misunderstandings in verbal and nonverbal communication emerge. And we will focus on establishing some guidelines for minimizing misunderstandings within and between cultural settings. Tonight, we'll work to develop effective communication skills in the multicultural landscape to develop cross-cultural understanding within our communities. As a longtime educator and administrator, I can attest to the essential nature of this work. So how this evening will work is we have two expert speakers who will each spend about 20 minutes sharing their insights and experiences. We will move from the big picture, kind of 30,000 view, into some specifics. After each speaker has finished, we'll then have another 20 minutes or so for our experts to answer your questions. So please post any questions or comments that occur to you during the presentation. I will monitor the questions on that chat board, and then we'll answer those at the end. If several questions are similar, we will combine and or rephrase. And please indicate if you have a specific question for one or both of our panelists. With all that in mind, I am delighted to introduce my colleague and friend, Charles Below from Below Consulting, who will give us a big picture snapshot of communication. I've had the privilege of working with Charles prior to this evening in some educational settings where he has been a wonderful leader in conversations with both adults and with students. And we look forward to hearing from him this evening. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, B. And thanks to Betty and World Artist Experience for the invitation and the opportunity for me to share with you all this evening. Effective cross-cultural communication is vital in any setting, whether it be in academic, business, commercial, or just in everyday conversational experiences. Anything less than that, anything less than effective, can complicate issues and prolong matters at the very least, or could lead to detrimental or even catastrophic outcomes in the most extreme cases or circumstances. Sorry. My screen is not sharing. Mark, I don't know if you can advance that slide. Mine is not advancing. There we go. Thank you. The means we use to communicate is continually changing and evolving. From the devices we use to the various platforms we might log on to with those devices, none of this changes, however, the ultimate goal of exchanging information from one person to another. My intention this evening is to share just a few things that I have found to be effective in communicating not only across different cultures or constituencies, but just in effective communication in general. I'll share a few best practices first, and then after that, we'll share a few pitfalls or traps that we would be do well to avoid. So let's take a look at a few best practices. One of the first and most helpful things I have found to be very effective is to be curious. That is to be, or rather to demonstrate an inquisitive mindset to learn about other cultures. Trying to develop an understanding and an appreciation for other worldviews helps to maintain that curiosity and, in a nonverbal way, allows you to demonstrate a genuine interest in the other party in that communication. I had a colleague once who was originally from another country, and um, as you might imagine, we had different native languages, we had different religious practices, we had different cultural experiences, and different perspectives on approaching certain problems and issues. I realized, thankfully, early on in our business relationship, that in order for us to be productive and be an effective team, as possible, be as effective as we possibly could be, it will be helpful for me to learn more than I knew about my colleagues' culture and values and possible perspectives on things that they might encounter. Not only did I ask my colleague specific questions in order to expand my knowledge, I also did my homework. I did my research, took in readings and watched documentaries and listened to podcasts, anything that I could get my hands on with regard to where my colleague originated from. Doing so, what I found was my questions became smarter, our conversations became and grew deeper, and it also provided helpful ways for our communication to evolve and for us to work better together. So being curious was, I determined to be one of the best practices that I could use to help with effective communication. Previously, in last week's summit, for those who may have seen it, Luby Ismail, president of Connecting Cultures, shared or talked about the importance of knowing oneself. I couldn't agree with Luby any more with what she shared and what she presented. Being mindful of your own communication style and or skills can be vital to ensuring the message you're trying to convey and to ensuring that that message is received as you're trying to convey it. Being mindful of your own communication style also helps you to be aware of nonverbal cues that the other person may be sending to let you know whether or not they're understanding what you're saying or if they're just totally clueless to what you may be trying to bring up. As an example, on a personal level, I'm originally from North Carolina, and I know that I sometimes speak with a Southern drawl. And for some who are not accustomed to or acclimated to dialects from the Eastern United States, that can present challenges. Reflecting back on my experience with the colleague that I mentioned previously, such was the case. My drawl, because I would get excited about the work we were doing, the things that we were sharing, sometimes my Carolina drawl would kick in and I would sort of pronounce things in ways that my colleague just was not familiar with. And what I had to learn was I needed to slow my rate of speech down, or I had to enunciate a certain way. All in a sense, just basically be mindful of how my communication and my delivery was coming across. So not only being curious, but also being mindful both proved to be best practices in our attempts to communicate more effectively. I would say probably one of the most effective or best practices that should not be overlooked, and that is the practice of active listening. Active listening is really simply a practice that communicates your genuine interest and value in what the other person is about and what it is that they have to say. As you look at these 8 skills associated with active listening, asking open-ended questions, requesting clarification on something that may have just been shared, being attentive in the conversation, perhaps summarizing and paraphrasing things that have been stated, reflecting on feelings that are both felt by yourself or demonstrated or expressed by the other communicant, being attuned to those feelings, and then asking more probing and deeper questions all leads to communicating something to that other party about what you think they are sharing and how you value what it is that they have to share. I would ask that we consider these 8 skills, and as I say, practice them. The more we practice them, the better we become at listening to what's being shared and what the other person has to say. So I shared just a few best practices: being curious, being mindful, and practicing active listening. I want to now switch to a few pitfalls that we should avoid, things that would behoove us to be aware of. First of all, your way of thinking is not the only perspective there is. I had to learn this the hard way. With that colleague that I mentioned earlier, I came into that business relationship thinking that because I was speaking the native language of English, that I basically was overlooking what they were sharing and their perspective. And I thought my way of thinking was the normal way of thinking. That's a mistake. That's a huge mistake. And it's a very serious trap that we ought to avoid. Regardless of whether it's in cross-cultural communication or just in everyday conversations. I have learned to avoid thinking that my way of thinking is the normal way of thinking. Other perspectives exist. Differences also exist. There's no need in stating or focusing or emphasizing the obvious. As I mentioned, my colleague was from another country. I didn't need to focus or emphasize that difference. Rather, what I chose to begin doing was to explore and look for possible commonalities that we had between us. What we found was that we actually did have some things in common that actually enhanced our perspectives and enhanced our business relationship. So I would say absolutely avoid emphasizing or focusing on differences. This next one really should go without saying: avoiding stereotypes. Labeling people never yields a positive outcome in any scenario or any setting. Never positive for the one doing the stereotyping, let alone the one who is the victim of it. So my advice is just don't do it. Stay away from it altogether. You might actually be one of the funniest people ever. However, not everyone understands or appreciates all styles of humor or joking. When communicating across cultures or across different constituencies, it's generally a best practice to keep jokes and humorous innuendos to a minimum. The reason I say this is with jokes, context matters. Not everyone has the luxury or the privilege or the experience of the same context of everybody else in the conversation, especially when we're talking cross-cultural experiences. So if the context is lost or not even present, then more than likely the joke or the humor is going to be lost as well. So I would advise avoiding those humorous innuendos. The same is true with slang. Again, context is huge with regard to slang. And so whenever possible, avoid the use of slang. If you can't explain the context in few words, it's probably best to just stay away from using the slang altogether. As B said, I wanted to take a 30,000-foot approach, a very high level approach at offering some best practices as well as some pitfalls to avoid, so that we could talk about some effective communication or ways to approach and arrive at effective communication. Effective communication, whether across different cultures or not, is vital in any setting. Consider using those best practices, such as being curious, being empathetic, being mindful, while also practicing while also practicing active listening skills to help make your conversations more effective. Further, avoiding a host of pitfalls or traps, such as the ones that I mentioned previously, will also contribute towards effective communication. I want to again thank B and thank Betty and World Artist Experience for allowing me to share with you. And now I want to flip it back over to B for our next panelist. Thanks, B.
Thank you, Charles. Really appreciated that opening series of thoughts for us. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Babar Fardanesh. He is a well-respected professor at the University of Maryland in the Smith Business School. He also has been on the summit team, so I have really enjoyed working with him over these past months, planning the 4 different summits. And I'm so honored that we got to be on a panel together. It's been really a lot of fun talking about such important issues with someone with his level of experience. Babar also is a part of the Piaget consulting firm, and he's here to offer some details of applying some of the concepts that Charles has outlined and adding some thoughts of his own, but applying these concepts in experiences in the world of international business. So I'd like to turn it over to Babar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind and wonderful introduction, Ms. Fuller. And hello, everybody. This evening, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the fascinating world of misunderstanding between cultures and among cultures. And so let me go ahead and open the PowerPoint here for you, and then we can continue. Yeah, within and between cultures. The first thing I would like to do is to give you the reason why we are having more misunderstandings than any other time. Then I'm going to give you some realistic examples of misunderstandings and the outcomes of it through verbal communication and nonverbal cues. And at the end, I'm going to suggest some guidelines of how we can minimize misunderstandings. So let us start. Well, one of the reasons that why we are having more misunderstanding than any other time is because countries are getting closer to each other for different reasons. For example, economic integration, economic agreements, management contract, outsourcing, franchising, and students come from one country to another country to get education. To give you an indication of the surge of communication and subsequently misunderstanding, I did borrow this statement from World Bank. It said that in 1980s, we had about $57 billion of trade or foreign direct investment. About in 2018, we did have about 27 times more than before. That means $1.5 trillion. So that shows that how we are getting involved so much in intercultural communications than ever before.
Babar, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm not seeing your slides.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah, if you can screen share for us.
I forgot that one. Would you see it now?
The screen share button at the bottom of your screen there.
Yes, sir. I got to, in fact, I'm going to, my apology. This one, screen share. I think we should be okay now.
Yep, it's coming up.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for letting me know. And then anyhow, this is the one that I was sharing with you about the rise of misunderstandings between cultures. And I'm going to expand on that one. So let us go to the next slide, this one here, that the outcomes of misunderstandings in diverse cultural settings could have different outcomes. One of them is that it can be humorous. The other one is going to make conflict resolution worse. And also it's going to affect negotiations between counterparts of different countries, which is known as breakdown in business negotiations, erosion of managerial effectiveness, and finally, loss of human lives. So these are some of the outcomes of misunderstandings. And this is why it's so critical that we learn as much as we can about minimizing misunderstandings between cultures. Now, let me share with you a few things about the nonverbal cues that we think probably that's the way it should be, but probably it's not. For example, punctuality. In the United States, punctuality is important, although you can be late about 15 minutes, it's quite all right. But more than that, it's not customary. In Switzerland or in Germany, you better not to be late at all, because every minute that you're late is not a good reflection of you to other people. And when you go to the Middle East or to South American countries, in most cases, punctuality really doesn't mean too much. In fact, in some countries, we do have the word inshallah. That means I'll be there when I am with the will of God. So I can be there half an hour late, 2 hours late, it's okay. In fact, if you are on time, people get surprised that what happened, why you're on time, and it just doesn't fit very well. Eye contacts. In some countries like United States, we encourage eye contacts. In some other countries, it's offensive to maintain frequent eye contacts. And unfortunately, we do not have time to get into detail, but I'm just pinpointing some of the misunderstanding that how in one country is one way, in another country is opposite. Handshakes. United States, we do have a very firm handshakes. When we go to the Middle East, we do have frequent but soft handshakes. Proxemics, or the distance between two people. American folks would like to stay from each other for about 3 feet, but in South American countries or in the Asian countries, people like to be much, much closer. Color green is a beautiful color in most countries, but not in Malaysia. It's associated with death. Emblems, when you create a circle with your index and with your thumb, that means okay in many places, but also is offensive in many parts of Turkey and Greece. Smile. Well, they said that if you do not know so much about another culture, smile, but not really. If you go to some other countries like Russia, a smile with no reason is offensive. That means you are not taking someone else's point seriously. Okay, let's move on. What happened there? Sorry for that. Already. So this is another one, folks. It's talking, before I was talking about non-verbal communication. This is a verbal communication. This is a graph that I did make myself, and I put it in one of my books. Basically, what it is that in some countries, we start to negotiate without wasting time. And if everything goes okay, then we gradually get to trust and friendship. In some other countries, it's opposite. You have to create trust and friendship and gradually get into negotiations. And that caused a lot of misunderstandings by itself. So the other one is interesting, is that saying one thing meaning another thing. And for example, the sign of friendship. If you go to the Middle East, someone else's home for a visit, they would insist for you to stay there for dinner. Well, sometimes they mean it, sometimes they don't mean it. and it is up to you to know about the explicit and implicit communications. Sometimes they do not mean it, but they want to preserve a good friendship relationships between you and them. But please note, this doesn't mean that this is an dishonest communication. As long as you are familiar with what they are saying and you can get a feel of whether they mean it or not, that would resolve the problem. Overdraft in the United States is not good because we are getting more money than we should or we were allowed. In England, that means you have a line of credit. Picture here means photo. In Australia means movie. Football in most countries means soccer. Here they mean, well, it's really a football, but here we call it soccer. And again, there are many cases that, again, we do not have time for me to go through the whole thing, but there are a lot of situations that you mean yes, but you mean no. But again, this is not a dishonest communication. The other side should understand through implicit communication that when you say yes, you really mean no. And what else? The advertisement. Let me go to the last one, advertisement. Whatever is effective advertisement in one country can be counterproductive in another country. A classic example of that is Nova. Nova is an automobile that used to be made by Chevrolet, and they did go to some South American countries. Nobody wanted to buy it. Then they noticed that the word is not a very good one because no means no, va means go. So that means the car doesn't go, and who is going to buy a car that doesn't go? The other example I can give you is by Electrolux, which is a Swedish company. They did go to England and they advertised by saying, our vacuum cleaner, nothing sucks like Electrolux. And they sold tons of it. They brought it to the United States and they did put the same advertisement that nothing sucks like Electrolux. And then, no, who wants to buy a product that really, really sucks? So they lost a lot of money. And so what else I would like to tell you? Achieving cross-cultural competencies. One of them, that means to minimize misunderstanding between cultures. One of them is called multicultural competencies. Well, the best thing that we can do, folks, is to increase our knowledge about different cultures. And there is a book, by the way, it's an extremely good one I like to suggest. It's called, it's by Edward T. Hall, High Context Culture, No Context Culture, that how the meaning of the word is not in how you say it, but is in what you say. In some other countries, it's not really matter what you say, it's how you say it. It's a fascinating book that you may want to review it. Emotional stability. Please do not get emotional or to get upset if something is being done that you didn't like. You have to respect the culture and beliefs and the norm of some other societies. The other one is called to develop an appreciation for intercultural diversity, I should say, is that has a lot of benefits. We can learn so much by increasing our knowledge or understanding from other cultures. Then we can learn so much and we can apply it into our own culture for the improvement. Finally, the last thing I would like to share with you about how we can minimize misunderstanding is called ethnocentrism. This and then very well, ethnocentrism simply means they feel that we are superior to other cultures, and that is, of course, a big barrier to intercultural understanding, because if I feel I am better than anybody else, I have less tendency to understand or to get close to other cultures. In line with that, there's a gentleman by the name of James Lee who came up with a term which is called self-reference criterion, commonly known as SRC, and it says that the biggest barrier to minimizing misunderstanding is that we make ourselves as a benchmark to analyze or compare other people or to measure the culture of other people. That means that if I do have certain way of, for example, driving, and if someone is not driving the way that I am driving, then I tend to say, well, these people do not know how to drive because I'm measuring it to my way of doing things, to my way of driving. And again, Dr. Lee of Harvard University believes that this is the biggest barrier, the biggest hurdle in getting close to other cultures and understanding other people and appreciating them. I hope I didn't go too much over time, and I'm open to any questions that you may have, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Bagar. That was wonderful, and Charles as well. I absolutely love diving into this topic with two such experts that we have here tonight. And I'm going to put an entreaty out to our audience and ask to please think of some questions that you have. We have received a few, and I had a few that we had already heard before we started. But I think one of the challenges of a forum like this in a Zoom setting is that we can't see the audience. So it's harder for us to know where the engagement level is. And this topic matters so much to the three of us. And we're hoping that it matters as much to those of you who are listening. And please don't be intimidated to ask any kind of a question that you have of our panelists. So I'm really, really hoping that the teacher in me would like to require it of you, but since I can't grade you or pass you or whatever, perhaps you won't take up the challenge, but I hope that you will ask some questions. It made me think of a few things, having grown up in Montgomery County outside of Washington, D.C., and then having moved to Anne Arundel County. There are some pretty distinct differences across the state of Maryland in terms of our population, and reflecting back to that first panel that we had, the first summit, where we got to hear the history of Maryland. We have a very, very diverse state that was founded on principles actually of inclusion, of freedom of religion, and to be your own self. So we live in a place that should be very open to this, and it's exciting for us to be able to talk about this. But again, growing up in Montgomery County, I thought that everyone grew up with friends from all over the world, and that my friend Handel, who was first generation from China, and my friend Teal, who was first generation from Lebanon, and they lived walking distance from me, and Oscar from Peru, and we'd go in each other's houses, and our houses would smell very different. I thought that was normal. So it goes back to what I think Charles was saying. To me, that seemed normal, and I remember being quite shocked when I left that bubble to find out that other people had not had such a rich, diverse experience, and assumed that people were more like them. So let me ask the two of you our first question. How do you help people communicate in a group when they are from several cultural backgrounds? So if you were having, and I think it may be different perhaps when you're having a meeting in person than when you're having a meeting on Zoom, but if each of you could could say a few words about how you help facilitate that if you're in one of those meetings.
So sure, I'll jump right in on that one. Yeah, I mean, this virtual setup makes things a bit more challenging. So I'm going to speak from the non-virtual, if I may. In that setting, that with the question that you just asked, if I happen to be the common or mutual friend to everyone else, I'm doing all the introductions, and in those introductions, I then will take time to share, because I have a relationship with each of them. I will take time to share. Bagar, this is my friend B, and she is from so and so, and you know, she's very interesting. She has this background or has these interests. And B, this is my good friend Bagar, whom I just recently met, but we're very close, getting to know each other well, and this is where he's from. To make those linkages, and very quickly help folks to dismiss any preconceived notions that they may have, any avert any concerns or or fears that they might, or apprehensions, I should say, that they may have. With me being the common person in that setting, we can sort of very quickly ease those tensions if there are any. In a business setting, in much the same way, I would do the introductions, but they would be in a much more professional manner, of course, to share the backgrounds or the expertise that each individual may be bringing to that discussion or for that meeting. If at all possible, maybe share some of that information ahead of time. So then that can not belabor that point at the beginning of the meeting. That's not always possible, but in the situations where I can, that's what I would try to do. Bagar, how about you? How would you approach that setting, helping folks communicate?
For that, well, I have been in situations like that frequently in different occasions of international negotiations. It's something that I would acknowledge at the beginning, that, hey, there are different cultures, different handshakes, and so on and so forth. And I would acknowledge that, and I would take the middle of the road by just being careful of what I'm saying, not to go to extreme, like as you pointed out, not to make humorous jokes at that time, because it may sound funny to some people and it may be offensive to others. So I take the middle of the road, and I acknowledge the fact that there are different cultures, and I tell them that I apologize for if in case there is a situation where I misstep on someone's toes, and then that's it.
Thank you. It was reminding me, I think I shared this with the two of you when we were working on this. I had a very close colleague who, in a school where I worked, who was from another country. And she said two of the hardest things for her in business meetings were references to the Wizard of Oz, because she had never seen the Wizard of Oz, and sports references that were not about football, soccer.
Right.
She didn't understand American football references or other sports references, and it was very off-putting, especially when it was someone who was in a higher power position, because she never wanted to ask the question or the clarification that was necessary. I'm going to tag on to the question that I just asked you for one that came in from our audience that is directly related, which was, can the speakers address the challenges of cross-cultural communication when writing emails and text? Can you, I'm not sure if you can come up with that right away, or if you need to let that percolate. Oh, see, there's one, percolate. That's
Percolate, right. Call a reference to old coffee pots, coffee makers.
like
Absolutely.
related thing. So anyway, so if you can address the challenges of cross-cultural communication with emails or text, since so much of that seems to fall in those categories.
Sure.
Go ahead. go first.
Well, that's an excellent question, and I would tell you why it is an excellent question. Is that in some countries like United States, when we meet someone the first or the second time, then we call them by their first name. Believe it or not, if you go to the Middle East, if you go to France, or if you go to Germany, you know the person for 20 years and you are close friends, but still you call them by the last name. So the first thing is that when you are going to send an email, don't say, hey, Joe, or whoever it might be. It sounds friendly in the United States, but in some other countries, it may not flow very well because they think that once you call someone by their first name, you're kind of putting them down. And in fact, I do have a friend from Iran for God knows 15 years. I'm still calling him by his last name. It just doesn't feel right to call him by the first name. So we have to be careful about that one. There is another thing, folks, is that because in the United States, every move that we make, if someone sneezes, then if we don't like it, we can go and sue the person by doing that. Therefore, when you look at the contract, business contract, or any type of agreements, there is so much detail, like several pages. In some other countries, they are very short and right to the point because they do not think that for every little bit of thing, there is a probability of you going and sue them. So the messages are much, much shorter. In the United States, agreement or the messages are much lengthy. So these are the two differences that we have to make a note of.
Great. Charles, you have to add?
Yeah. Thanks, B. I was just going to add on to what Barbara was saying. Indeed, there definitely are challenges, very real and very apparent challenges when talking about textualized communication. One of the things that I have done and that's been helpful for me when emailing or texting or virtual chat, if you will, with someone from another country or different region or area, if at all possible beforehand, before actually hitting send on that email, I reach out to a colleague that maybe has had experiences with either that individual or someone from that region or that country. Maybe they can help give me some insight into some of the nuances and the customs or traditions that I should be aware of in that communication, whether it's email or text or otherwise textualized. I can't overemphasize again some of the best practices that I mentioned previously about for myself being aware, being knowledgeable, reading and getting information, as much information as I can about those parts of the world that I may be interacting with, or interacting with someone from those different parts of the world. It's always helpful when you have that luxury of time. You don't always have the luxury of time though. So, and in those moments when I don't have the luxury of time, either reach out to a colleague or if a response is needed immediately, I oftentimes will open up with an apology. Please forgive me if I misspeak or if this does not resonate or is unclear. Let me know so that I can correct it. This may be new territory for me, or this may be my first interaction with someone from this company or from this region of the world, and I'm excited to expand my network in this way. So please help me. I'm interested in learning. What I have found is that has absolutely let the other person know that, okay, Charles is not just some arrogant American. He's actually wanting to learn and to grow. And so I have found people to be more receptive to that than not.
Wonderful. I have another question that again relates to this, which makes sense. This is from an anonymous attendee. Quoting, I worked in a multicultural office in Maryland and had difficulty when passing others in close hallways. I was inclined to look people in the face and say hello or briefly wave when I passed. Not everyone did the same back to me, and I slowly realized that my actions were not comfortable to all others. Do you have any comments on how I could have handled this better?
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Charles, why don't you go first and then Bob?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I apologize, Bhaga. I'm nodding and I'm excited about this because
I know, I am too. That's wonderful.
being from, as I mentioned, I'm from North Carolina, and in North Carolina, it is not uncommon to sit on your porch and wave at people as they drive by and not know who they are at all. It is not uncommon to walk past people that you absolutely don't know who they are and just speak. As the anonymous caller question, I too have run into that challenge and struggled, admittedly, for a long time. In fact, to the point where I took it personally. What's wrong with me? I'm just trying to be nice. I'm just being friendly, just saying hi, I'm greeting, only to get odd stares back at me. What I've learned is, just as the caller question or put in their question, not everybody is comfortable with that. And so I have learned to adjust by taking notice of nonverbal cues that both Bhaga and I sort of hinted at. Some of those nonverbal cues in a narrow or just in a hallway in general where foot traffic is coming towards me. If the person makes eye contact and quickly diverts their eye, I'm taking it they either just don't want to be bothered by my greeting, or they're just not inclined to want to speak to a stranger. So I may likely not offer that greeting. If, however, on the other hand, a person coming towards me makes eye contact, maybe even offer a slight smile, I will. I feel comfortable with saying, a simple greeting, hello, how are you? Good day or whatever, and continue moving. Again, those nonverbal cues, I can't overstate how valuable they are. They can be very subtle at times, so it pays to practice and be attentive to them. And then also talk with folks, ask them, hey, what are some of the customs around here with regard to speaking to strangers? Do people like that or no? That's just what's been helpful for me, and I continue to practice that. But I can totally relate.
Bhaga, do you have something to add?
Yeah. As Charles and I mentioned at the beginning, is that the misunderstanding can be between and within cultures. Let me share two stories or two things that one of them happened to me and one of them happened to one of my students. The one about me was that I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. It's a small town with full of students, and they're very friendly. It's a very friendly environment. So when we pass by each other on the street, it's just we keep saying hello, how are you? Just so casual. One time, it was maybe about 20 years ago, I did fly to New York to see a friend of mine. Believe me, I was walking down the street and then I saw there was a lady and she had a smile. So I did go to her to say, hi, how are you? The lady started to scream. She thought that I am going to rob her or to get her purse away. And I was shocked because she was shocked. Then I was shocked that why she's shocked. Then I noticed that, well, New York and Boulder, Colorado does not have the same environment. Another thing is that I did have a student, a lady from Peru. She said that she married an American gentleman, and then they did have a boy, like 3-year-old, 4-year-old boy. And every time he was talking to the father, and then the poor kid, the head was down, the father would say, hey, listen, I'm talking to you, look at my eyes. When I'm talking to you, look at me, don't look at the wall, and this and that. So when he did go to the mother, who was from Peru, she would say that when the poor guy was looking at her mother's face, the mother would get upset by saying that when I'm talking to you, put your head down. Be ashamed of yourself, keep looking at me, put your head down. And then one time the kid there was a discussion, so they wanted to talk to the kid. And then the poor guy said that, hey, listen, before you're going to talk, you make up your mind because my neck is getting tired. I'll keep looking down and keep looking up. Do you want me to look up? I'll look up. If you want me to look down, I'll look down. But you two, you make up your mind. So this is a realistic, and it's a fun example of how even in a nuclear family, this type of misunderstandings can happen.
I think this also applies in school settings as well, because you can be a teacher and have kids from all over the world. And there's gender-based stuff that can be different about being more directive or asking, could everybody please, versus everyone sit down. You know, there are so many nuances to the communications for everyone. We could probably talk about this. We could probably write a book together, the three of us, just for this conversation.
Absolutely.
This is also, you know, this is another question, and an addendum to the one we just answered from one of our listeners, or one of our listeners, viewers. What about direct versus indirect communication, which is kind of what we've touched on. New Yorker, for example, I'll always say it like it is. In Mexico, I learned that people are often very indirect when they state something, which was very perplexing to me. How do we navigate that challenge? So Bagar, why don't you go ahead and then.
Well, actually, there is a case from Mexico, and this is a true story, folks, that one time, I think this is important for us to know about how it could cause misunderstandings, is that one time an American manager who believed in inclusions or cooperative decision making or participative decision making, he did go to one of his employees saying that I do not have time and there is a project that I should have done it, but it's a little bit complex. I know you are familiar, he said to the employee who was from Mexico. The Mexican gentleman, he put his head down and he said, yes, sir. And well, the manager said, can you do it? The man said, yes, I can. So he said, well, once you finish it, put it on my desk tomorrow. The manager came the next day and looked at the office. On his desk, there was nothing there. He rushed to the person from Mexico, the employee, saying that, hey, Jose, you're supposed to finish that project and put it on my desk. What happened? And then he did put his head down and said, sir, I am very sorry. And then the manager got confused and he said that, I don't understand these people. They said they do it and they don't. So what is, if you don't want to do it, just why don't you come and say, I don't want to do it? And then they did go to the Mexican, but they talked to him and said, what happened? He said that we respect our authority. We cannot say no to them, but they should know better that we respect them because they're supposed to know these things. They should be a role model for us to manage their time. This person couldn't manage their time and he wanted me to do his work. It's like me asking him to do my work. I'm respecting him because he should know it. And I said, yes, I do it for you because it is in my culture, we just don't like to say no to our managers, but he should have known better than that. So this is how misunderstanding can happen. Go ahead, please.
That's very complicated. Very complicated and very difficult, I think, to unpack some of that. I want to share a couple of comments just in case you guys don't get to see them, because there's some great comments and then I'll throw questions back in. Someone said, I love that Mr. Fardnish used an Arabic word to describe punctuality in South America. I think it was a perfect word to explain this. My South American students and their families need to be reminded about what time they need to arrive for after-school events because of this cultural difference. And then another one said, I like the comments about self-reference criteria. It would appear the more egocentric approach, the greater the possibility of communication barriers and breakdowns in communication, which is exactly what we, I think, started with. Avoiding assumptions and embracing an open approach would seem to be a positive way to enter into dialogue. Thank you for the comment regarding how we address someone in terms of first or last names from a professional perspective, out of respect. That was great too. Here's a kind of, I guess, easier one. Do you have any recommendations for universal greetings and goodbyes during COVID when meeting in person? I resorted to a sort of half bow instead of handshakes. So Charles, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, sure. I think the world over, we're still trying to figure this whole thing out. I have done everything from a half bow with some of my Asian American colleagues to just a simple wave, goodbye, as well as hello. Maybe I should have said that in the right order. Hello and then goodbye. I've done with some close associates and colleagues and friends, have actually greeted each other with an elbow bump. Just very quick tap and then step back and maintain the distance. I think one of the most important things, though, in all seriousness, with the greetings and salutations during COVID, when you're actually in person but trying to maintain distance with a partially covered face, so you can't see the mouth, can't see the smile, can't read the lips or anything like that. I think it's one of the best things is to actually extend the greeting. Hi, B. Hi, Varga. Great to see you. Varga, it's great to see you. Wish you well. To actually extend the greeting and not allow the matter of how we have to extend it to be the barrier or be the stumbling block, but to just extend that greeting. Obviously, with COVID and the concerns of physical distancing and such, we have to be mindful of those restrictions or advisings. But we can still extend the greetings and the salutations in a similar fashion and not be off-putting.
Varga, did you add anything?
It's something so new to me and many folks to experiencing this virus thing. And I think the safest thing is what Charles has suggested, to stay a little bit away, and you could just somehow through your nonverbal communication, you could just say, I am happy that I met you, because it's very hard to say anything through the mask. So, but one thing I like to share with you is that even with regard to greeting or even sitting, there are so many things that we need to know about Japan, about the Middle East, or about Iran. For example, in Iran, if after an initial greeting, even when you want to sit, you make sure that the other person would sit first, because they just want to, that person wants to say that you are of the higher authority, so you should sit first. And that person should insist that no, the other party should sit first. So for about maybe a minute or so, say, after you, no, after you, no, please, after you. So it just goes through that process. That it's something I wanted to bring it up, that even sitting can be an issue in multicultural environment. But yeah.
So I have a specific question, I think, for Barbara, for you to answer first, which is, can you explain a little more about what the self-reference criterion means?
Sure. Well, there is a word which is called ethnocentrism. Some countries, which I'm not going to mention, I'm not talking about the United States, but there are some other countries that are very much ethnocentric. That means they do not like to get close to people. they are very much into the field of cultural superiority. I like to emphasize that cultural superiority. That means my culture or my beliefs, my values are better than anybody else in the world. With that approach, then obviously you cannot minimize misunderstandings because they are not willing to understand your values and your culture. Associated with this term, Dr. James Lee came up with the self-reference criterion. Self-reference criterion simply means that when we make ourselves as a benchmark, as a measurement to judge other people. And that's bad because as long as I think I am the benchmark, everybody should measure to me. And if they don't, they are not good, then again, it's going to be in the same line of being ethnocentric. And this is truly, in my view, is the biggest problem, biggest barrier in getting close to people of different cultures.
Great. Charles, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that was great. That was excellent.
Okay. Another comment that came in, which I think is something good for us to remember, was we need to respect other diets and not assume that most cultures have the same diet as we do. We need to embrace and respect the diet of others. I think that's a really good one. I have very good friends from India, for example, who are not meat eaters, and having them over for dinner, I need to honor them. I need to not be serving them something that would be disrespectful towards them. But I think that can be, it goes back to what you both have been saying before. We have to be able to ask those questions, right, so that I don't stumble into it and then have friends over, just like any friends who don't eat meat or don't eat fish or keep kosher or whatever the dietary needs are.
B, I was just going to add to that. I think that, back to that whole idea of actually one of the practices that I mentioned about being curious and also being empathetic, understanding and appreciating those differences. But in order to understand them and appreciate them, you first got to learn about them. And I believe it's very helpful, both in the example that you just shared, and I'm thinking of friends and colleagues of my own who have different eating habits or preferences, diet preferences, just as you mentioned with your good friends. It was helpful for me to learn about those things first, rather than to be on the other end and then having to apologize or otherwise be off-putting to them and not really giving consideration to what their preferences may be.
Exactly.
All right, I have a comment question. Thank you for referencing the difficulty of understanding jokes, as oftentimes they're not understood by those that are not involved in the same culture. Poetry, figures of speech, etc., can be extremely difficult to understand as well. My approach is to ask for an explanation and definition, but in a bigger meeting, it's much more difficult. Any suggestions to approach large meetings?
Yeah, so I would I would tend to do the same thing. I would ask for explanation and or definitions, just the same. Excuse me. And if the setting allows for it, if the timing allows for it, absolutely. I would say, even if I know the context, being mindful that others around me may not get it, or hearing them complain about not understanding the context of the joke. I have on occasion asked the individual sharing it to explain it in very easily understood terms. In a large meeting, though, you may not be able to do that. And so one of the things that you might consider is, if the moment doesn't allow for the explanation immediately after, I would make my way to that individual and give them the feedback that, you know what, the joke you told or the reference that you made may have been lost on some who were in this meeting for this reason. you might consider sharing a little bit more. Maybe there's an after action messaging or email that you may be able to offer some context in that way. If that's a possibility, I would encourage doing that. Find some way to get the feedback back to that individual. One, not so much so that they can correct it for that big meeting, but so that they know going forward. So that they don't repeat, excuse me, that misstep or that miscue.
Bob, or anything to add?
I think he said it all. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Another comment that you, I think, both might want to weigh in on. Someone wrote in and said, sometimes when people are raised in urban areas are not likely to be as friendly as people from rural areas. I've kind of heard it both ways, but often people shun people from other cultures based solely on preconceived notions about the person. It may not be communication, it may be just prejudice. And often people from various cultures are curious to know people from other cultures. So that actually hit a lot of different pieces. So Bagar, I don't know if you have any comments, insights to add to what this writer said. And then Charles.
My apology. Would you please repeat briefly the question? There was a distraction here.
It's someone's observation
The
that
observation.
what I really think the root of it is that it might not be communication issues, it might be prejudices. And how are how would you address that?
Well, I mean, the prejudice is a deep-rooted issue. It's very, very hard to resolve it in a few minutes. It did go is a transgenerational problem. It goes from one generation to another generation. And all we can do is to be aware of it and again, not to have the emotional stability, as I mentioned it before, is not to get upset, because please remember, it's not your fault, it's someone else's issue. And there's, depending to the situation, you have to be adaptive to find the best alternative of how to deal with it.
Charles, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with what August said. I would add the matter of being open to those differences. I've shared with others before, none of us are as open-minded as we think we are. When we change our mind, we usually change it to something that we now agree on or think is right, that we previously didn't. So the matter of the generalizing of someone from the urban area thinking one way about someone from rural and vice versa is just that. It goes back to that avoiding stereotypes and labeling. I have encountered and experienced the matter of folks being from another area different from where I originated, who were just as nice, if not nicer, than myself and others who came from where I originated, and then experienced just the same thing going the opposite way. I think like Bagar said, it's a deep-rooted issue that's not going to be solved in one interaction with an individual. If an individual is approaching the scenario and they harbor a prejudice or some prejudices against another person or group of people, one interaction is not going to change it. It reminds me of a saying my grandfather used to say, and that was, you can't chop a tree down with one swing. It takes many swings of that axe to get that tree to fall. And it might not even be at the result of my axe doing it. It may be somebody else's after I've tried several times. The whole point is those things have to be repeated. They have to keep seeing the goodness of people in order for those prejudices and those stereotypes and labels to begin to fall off, or they begin to take them off in those situations. One encounter, one experience is not going to change it. Like Bagar said, we have to approach it, and just be aware of it. and be mindful of it, and then not let it change who we are. In fact, just operate to show the just the opposite side of what someone else's opinion may be. And so we help chop that tree down with many blows, many swings, not just one.
Excellent.
So we're just about out of time here. And what I would love is for each of you to have a chance to just in 1 or 2 sentences, I mean, really, this is just like a little quick wrap up of what you think are the most important things to keep in mind with cross-cultural communication, or one piece of advice for our audience as they move forward. Just pick one or the other and just give a quick.
Charles, you go first, please.
Actually, it's your turn to go first, I think, but either way.
Okay, I would just say very quickly, I like to keep in mind that I'm different, just like you. And in that way, we are the same. So the concerns that I have may actually also be your concerns. It behooves me to be aware of them. That was actually 3 sentences, I believe, Pete, and I apologize.
All right.
Math was not my favorite subject, so.
Well,
See if you can do it in 2, Bagar.
surely. Well, I'll try. Well, the best thing is to really trying to have an open and receptive mind, and to be resilient and adaptive. I think I did go more than 2 words, but anyhow, really, these are the critical things that I would like to share with everybody, those that they want to enter into cross-cultural arena. These are the advice that I would give them.
Wonderful. You two have been inspirational this evening. And I would tie it up by saying that in my experience with working with students, what I have always told them, that I believe all humans have 2 pretty basic needs. We all want to have a sense of belonging, and we all want to have a sense of purpose. And that if we are going to help each other have a sense of belonging, it is doing everything that you were saying this evening. And Betty has provided a wonderful, and World Artist Experience, a wonderful forum for our conversation this evening for honoring International Education Month. But whether it is outreach to people in other countries or outreach within our own state of Maryland, which, as we have heard, is a very diverse state, I hope that we can take the lessons that we learned and keep learning, because there's so much. You can't do it in one 60-minute session and then check the box and say, well, now I can do all of this. It's years of work and the acts that Charles was saying, and hugs and smiles and handshakes and bows and asking questions that will move us all forward. So thank you this evening, and I'd like to hand it back to our mighty leader, Betty McGinnis.
Thank you, B. Fuller, for fielding all these questions and serving as this excellent moderator, and to Charles Below and Bagar Farnanash for really being these wonderful panelists who gave us much to think about this evening. For each of you inspiring us to think more thoughtfully as we communicate in our daily lives with people not only from different cultures in our own communities, but all over the world. And also to the committed volunteer summit team who's worked week after week to think through this summit. And to you, the wonderful audience, we thank you for joining us this evening. We invite you and your colleagues and friends to return next Monday for the final session, Sharing Our Voices Using the Arts for Cultural Understanding. Someone asked me if the sessions would be recorded. They are recorded and on the World Artist Experience's website, WAE at comcast.net. Thank you for joining us. Stay well. Happy Thanksgiving to each of you, and good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was so fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a
Happy
pleasure.
Thanksgiving, all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.